There's a moment in Baldur's Gate 3 where you can meet the Netherbrain face to face. It's terrifying, ancient, impossibly powerful. But here's what the game doesn't tell you. That thing you're fighting. It's not even close to being the most dangerous thing that's ever threatened this world. 2,000 years ago, a wizard cast a single spell. One spell. And when it failed, entire cities plummeted from the sky. Thousands died in seconds. Magic itself broke, and the goddess who held reality together had to sacrifice herself just to stop the total collapse of existence. His name was Karsus, and he made the mistake of thinking mortals could replace gods. But that's just one chapter in a story that spans 10,000 years. Before the Absolute, before the Mind Flayers, before the gods themselves walked the earth as mortals, there was something else, something older, something that most people in Baldur's Gate 3 have completely forgotten. And that's the key to understanding everything. Because in the Forgotten Realms, forgetting is how the most dangerous things survive. Part 1. Before gods had names, the silence before creation. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not darkness, because darkness implies an absence of light, and light didn't exist yet. Not silence, because silence requires the potential for sound. Just nothing. An empty void where even the concept of emptiness hadn't been invented yet. Then came Io. Ao, the overgod. Ao, the hidden one. The being so powerful that he makes other gods look like children playing with toys. And the first thing Ao did was create a universe. Not just a planet, not just a solar system, but an entire sphere of reality called realm space, carved from the swirling chaos of something called the phlogiston, the strange fluid that makes up the space between worlds. Inside this sphere, Ao crafted multiple worlds floating through what the inhabitants would later call the Sea of Night. But we care about one world in particular. One world that would become the center of countless stories, the battleground of gods, and the home of every adventure we know. That world was called Aber-Toril. Notice that name. Aber-Toril, not just Toril. We'll come back to why that matters. The problem with creation. But Ao didn't fill his creation with life. Not yet. First came something else. Something Ao hadn't exactly planned for. Or maybe he had. It's hard to say with beings that exist outside of time and speak in riddles. From the elemental chaos, from the raw stuff of fire and water and earth and air, came the primordials. Ancient beings of pure elemental power, older than most gods, powerful enough to reshape continents with a thought. They saw Aber-Toril floating there, empty and new, and they wanted it. The primordials claimed sections of the world for themselves. They ripped pieces away from the main planet, the pieces that were too bright or too dark for their tastes. And these became the Feywild and the Plane of Shadow. They were remaking reality to suit themselves, and Ao watched. Because that's what Ao does. He watches. He rarely interferes. But someone else was about to show up, who would interfere quite a bit. The twin goddesses. In the timeless mist that preceded creation, before light and dark were separate concepts, two goddesses were born. Twins, but opposites. Sisters who would become eternal enemies. Selûne, the goddess of moonlight, silver hair flowing like starlight, curious and creative. And Shar, the goddess of darkness, cold and patient and hungry for the silence of the void. Together, the twin goddesses began to shape the world. They created the heavenly bodies, the stars and moons and sun. They set them in motion. And they created something new, something neither had intended. They gave life to one of the celestial bodies they'd made. That living world goddess would be called Chontir, the Earth Mother. Chontir wanted warmth. She wanted life to grow and flourish. She wanted creatures to walk upon her surface and build and dream and love. Selûne looked at her creation and smiled. Yes, she thought. Yes, let there be warmth and life and growth. Shar looked at the same creation and saw a mistake. The void had been perfect, silent, still, empty. Now it was being filled with noise and chaos and change. This needed to stop. The twin goddesses went to war. The first war of creation. Picture this, two goddesses, each powerful enough to create worlds, fighting across the newly formed cosmos. Every blow reshaping reality. Every clash creating new gods as byproducts of their conflict. From their battle, deities of war, disease, death, and murder were born, spinning off like sparks from a cosmic forge. The war raged on. Selûne was losing. Shar's darkness was overwhelming the light. The newborn world hung in the balance. Then Selûne made a desperate choice. She reached deep inside herself and tore out a piece of her own divine essence, her very being, and hurled it at Shar. The blast of raw, godly power struck both of them, and from that explosion, something new was born. Netheril, the first goddess of magic, the being who would weave together the weave itself, the fundamental fabric of reality that makes magic possible. With Mistril's birth came balance. The war between the sisters ended, not in victory for either side, but in a stalemate that would last forever. But here's what most people don't know. Selûne's sacrifice, that piece of herself she tore away. Based on what happens later, we might infer she never fully recovered. She gained an ally, yes, but she permanently weakened herself in the process. It might explain why, throughout all of history, Shar always seems just slightly more powerful than her sister, always one step ahead, always hungrier. And Shar never forgot that moment, never forgave it. She would spend the next 10,000 years trying to undo what Selûne had created. Trying to return the universe to that perfect, empty silence. She's still trying. And in Baldur's Gate 3, you'll see the scars of her latest attempt. The Dawn War. The gods were settling in. Reality was stabilizing. Magic now flowed through the weave. And the primordials? They were furious. These elemental beings had been shaping Abertoril for themselves, and now suddenly there were gods everywhere, making rules, creating mortals, filling the world with order and structure. The primordials wanted chaos. They wanted raw, elemental freedom. War erupted again. The Dawn War, they called it. Gods versus primordials, order versus chaos, divine power versus elemental fury. The battles raged across the world and shook the planes themselves. One primordial, Asgarath the World Shaper, became so enraged that he grabbed an entire moon made of ice and hurled it at Abertoril, intending to destroy the planet entirely. If he couldn't have it, no one would. This forced Ao to intervene. The Overgod split Abertoril into two separate worlds existing in the same space but on different planes. Aber became the world of the primordials. Toril became the world of the gods. They were separated, kept apart by powerful magic. To maintain this separation, Ao created the Tablets of Fate, artifacts of immense power that recorded the names and domains of every god and primordial under his authority, and served as the cosmic lock keeping the two worlds apart. Remember this. The Tablets of Fate. They're going to become very important later, and when they're stolen, when they're broken, the consequences will shake the entire world. The creator races, with the primordials banished to Arbeir and the gods claiming Toril, life finally had a chance to flourish. And flourish it did, in strange and wonderful ways. The first civilizations of Toril weren't human. Humans wouldn't arrive for tens of thousands of years. Instead, the world belonged to what would later be called the creator races, ancient species with powers that bordered on the divine. The Saruch came first, serpentine beings who claimed the warm jungles and created entire races of reptilian creatures through their mastery of life magic. They built great empires and fought wars that would later be remembered only in myth. According to their own legends, the Saruch received help from elder gods in their battles against the primordials, though whether this is true or just propaganda is lost to time. Then came the Batrachi, amphibious sorcerers whose understanding of magic rivaled even the gods. They shaped lands, controlled weather, and built cities that floated on water and air alike. The Batrachi civilization spread across huge swaths of Toril during what's called the Days of Thunder, an epoch when these creator races ruled supreme. The Aeiri followed, bird-like beings who claimed the skies. They built their cities in the clouds and created the Arakokra, Kenku, and other avian races. Their empire, consisting of floating nations like Krokar, Quor, and Kukruishara, soared above the world, looking down on the surface dwellers below. And somewhere, in the jungles of what would later be called Katashaka, the first humans shivered and stared at the sky, barely more than beasts, centuries away from civilization. They didn't look important. They didn't seem like they'd ever amount to much. They'd prove everyone wrong. The Tearfall. Around 31,000 years before Baldur's Gate 3, the Batrachi were at war. They'd been fighting the Titans, descendants of the giant god Anam All-Father, and they were losing badly. In desperation, the Batrachi did something catastrophically stupid. They summoned the primordials. These ancient amphibian sorcerers performed a ritual that tore through the barriers Au had created. They freed several primordials from their imprisonment, thinking they could control these ancient powers, thinking they could use them as weapons against the Titans. The gods responded immediately. They couldn't let the primordials reclaim Toril. Another war erupted, and this one made the Dawn War look like a playground scuffle. Asgarath, still angry about losing Toril the first time, grabbed that ice moon again and threw it at the planet. Io intervened once more, but even his power couldn't completely stop the catastrophe. The moon struck Toril. The impact was so massive that it shattered the supercontinent of Meroboros into pieces. Mountains rose overnight, seas boiled, the land cracked and bled. This event, the Tearfall, reshaped the entire world. When the dust settled, Toril had new continents: Faerun, Katashaka, Maztica, Zakara, and Karatur. The geography we know today was born in that moment of apocalyptic destruction. And the primordials? Io sealed them away again, some imprisoned in hidden places, some driven back to the elemental chaos. But the damage was done. The Batrachi civilization collapsed. The Days of Thunder ended. The creator races began their long decline. The world was ready for someone new. Part 2. The Rise and Fall of Netheril, the Golden Age of Magic. Fast forward through thousands of years. The creator races are gone, their civilizations reduced to ruins and legends. Elves have spread across the world, building their own empires. Dwarves are carving kingdoms under mountains. And humans, those primitive ape creatures from Katashaka, have spread across Faerun and started building their own civilizations. Around 3,700 years before Baldur's Gate 3, in the area that would later become the Anauroch Desert, a human empire rose that would change magic forever. Netheril. The Netherese discovered something that would transform them from ordinary humans into the greatest arcanists the world had ever seen. They found a golden book called the Nether Scrolls, containing magical knowledge from the creator races themselves. With these scrolls, Netherese wizards learned to manipulate the weave in ways that would make modern mages weep with envy. They created spells beyond 9th level, spells that could reshape continents, spells that could alter time itself. One wizard named Iulam achieved such mastery that he transformed himself into something beyond mortality, becoming the first true lich. And then, around 4,000 years ago, a wizard named Proctive created the spell that would define Netheril forever: the Flying City. Proctive's spell could shear the top off a mountain, flip it upside down, and float it through the air, creating a perfectly flat surface for building. The Netherese built entire cities on these floating mountains, dozens of them soaring through the sky. High Netheril, they called it, the realm of the arcanists. Below, on the ground, Low Netheril continued, the cities where common people lived, looking up at the marvels floating overhead. Life was good. Magic flowed freely. The Netherese explored other planes, created powerful artifacts, and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They even experimented with spell jamming, creating ships that could sail between worlds, though they abandoned that research after encountering illithids in the void. Illithids. Mind flayers. Remember that. They've been lurking around this world for a very long time. But Netheril's golden age was about to end, and it would end because one wizard couldn't accept the limitations of mortality. Karsus the Arrogant, in the year that Netherese calendar marked as 3520 Nether Year, approximately 339 years before Dala Reckoning began, a child was born who would doom his entire civilization. Karsus was a prodigy, a savant. By the time other wizards were learning basic cantrips, Karsus was creating new spells. He mastered magic with such speed that it seemed almost supernatural. People called him the child who would be a god. They were more right than they knew. By Karsus's time, Netheril was in trouble. They'd been at war with the Faerim, aberrant creatures that drained life and magic from the land. The deserts were spreading. The war was grinding on. And the greatest arcanist of the previous generation, Iulam, had disappeared without explanation. Karsus felt the weight of the Empire on his shoulders. He believed it was his destiny to save Netheril, and he thought he knew exactly how to do it. He would become a god, not through worship, not through ascending over millennia, but through one spell. One incredibly complex 6-hour-long spell that would allow him to steal the divine power of an existing deity and make it his own. He called it Karsus's Avatar, and he chose his target carefully. He needed to steal power from the most powerful source of magic he could find. So he chose Maestril, the goddess of magic itself. The Folly Karsus cast his spell. For 6 hours he poured his will and power into the incantation. The magic built and built until reality itself began to strain. And then it worked. For a fraction of a second, Karsus ascended. He touched divinity. He felt the power of a god flowing through him. He knew what it was to be infinite and eternal and perfect. Then he understood his mistake. Maestril wasn't just the goddess of magic. She was magic. She was actively holding the weave together, managing every spell being cast across Toril at every moment, keeping reality stable while the war with the Faerim damaged the fundamental fabric of existence. Karsus suddenly had all that responsibility, and he had absolutely no idea how to handle it. The weave convulsed. Magic surged wildly out of control. For a brief moment, every spell in the world doubled in power. Then, magic stopped working entirely. Without magic, the flying cities of Netheril fell from the sky. Mistral, with her last act before dying, sacrificed herself to save the weave. She blocked Karsus's access to divine power and cut him off completely. The spell failed. Magic stopped. Karsus's body turned to stone mid-transformation, his face frozen in an expression of horror as he watched his empire crash to earth, killing everyone he'd ever known. Mistral died, but she was immediately reborn as Mistra, a new goddess of magic with a new mandate. She imposed strict rules. No spell above 9th level would ever function again. Mortal spellcasters would have limits. What Karsus had done would never be possible again. She managed to save 3 of the falling cities, landing them gently enough that some survived. Honoria, Azram, and Hlondath came down intact. A 4th city, Thultanthar, escaped destruction by being pulled into the plane of shadow by its Arcanist ruler. But the rest? They shattered on impact. Thousands died instantly. The survivors stumbled away from the wreckage in shock, and the Netherese empire crumbled in a single day. Karsus's Folly, they called it. The day one man's arrogance destroyed the greatest magical civilization the world had ever seen. The ruins of Netheril scattered across northern Faerun still hold powerful magic. The floating city of Ithrin, frozen in ice in the Reghed Glacier, would sleep for thousands of years. And the few who survived scattered, carrying fragments of Netherese knowledge to new lands. One survivor, Raumark, led refugees south to found the nation of Halrua, a place where the old magic could continue in secret. The rest of Netheril became the Anarok Desert, lifeless and dry, a monument to hubris. But the shadow city of Thultanthar, it didn't stay in the plane of shadow forever. It would return. And when it did, its inhabitants would have plans. Dark plans involving gods and ancient magic and revenge. We'll get to that. Part 3. The Time of Troubles. Dandamwal, the Age of Mortals and Gods. For thousands of years after Netheril's fall, civilization rebuilt. Elves founded great nations like Mithdrana and Evermeet. Dwarves dug their kingdoms deep. Human kingdoms rose and fell and rose again. Cormyr, Armen, Waterdeep, Neverwinter. And the gods? The gods walked the plains, distant and powerful, granting spells to their faithful, occasionally sending avatars to meddle in mortal affairs, but mostly staying in their divine realms. Until the year 1358, DR, the Year of Shadows. That year, everything changed. 2 gods, Bane the Tyrant and Merkul the Lord of the Dead, stole the Tablets of Fate from Ao. Remember those? The artifacts that defined each god's power and domain? Bane and Merkul thought that if they possessed the tablets, they could rewrite reality, granting themselves ultimate power over all other deities. Ao was furious. The Overgod summoned all the gods of Faerun and demanded to know who took his tablets. None confessed. Bane and Merkul stayed silent, thinking they could hide what they'd done. Bad idea. Ao passed judgment. Every god except one would be cast down to Teril, forced to walk the world in mortal avatar form until someone returned the tablets. The one exception was Helm, the god of guardians, who Ao commanded to stand at the gates to the outer planes and prevent anyone, mortal or divine, from passing through. The time of troubles began. Gods walk the earth. Imagine waking up one morning and seeing your god walking down the street. Not a priest, not a prophet, but the actual deity, vulnerable and mortal and right there in front of you. That was the time of troubles. Divine magic stopped working unless a cleric was within a mile of their god's avatar. Arcane magic, no longer regulated by Maestra, became wildly unpredictable. Spells failed randomly or produced catastrophic results. Wild magic zones and dead magic zones appeared across Faerun. The gods themselves were vulnerable for the first time in history. They could be wounded, they could be killed, and many of them were. Maestra, attempting to return to her divine realm, confronted Helm at the celestial stairway. Helm refused to let her pass. Io's command was absolute. They fought, and Helm, following his duty even though it broke his heart, killed Maestra. With the goddess of magic dead, the weave convulsed. Magic became even more chaotic. Maestra's essence scattered across the land, seeping into the soil, causing magical disturbances that would last for years. Bane the Tyrant was slain by Torm, the god of duty and loyalty, in a climactic battle outside the city of Tantras. But the fight killed Torm too. Both gods fell, their avatars destroyed. Bhaal, the god of murder, walked the roads of Faerun wearing a mortal body. An adventurer named Kyric, ambitious and cruel, acquired a sword called God's Bane. That sword was actually Mask, the god of thieves, in disguise. At Boaraskia Bridge, Cyric used this divine weapon to kill Bhaal. But Bhaal had seen his death coming. Unlike the other gods, Bhaal had time to prepare. In the years before the time of troubles, he'd walked Toril in mortal form and sired dozens, perhaps hundreds of children with mortal women. Each of these children carried a fragment of his divine essence. The Bhaalspawn, children of the god of murder. When Bhaal died, his plan activated. His essence scattered among his offspring, waiting. One day the Bhaalspawn would slaughter each other, combining their divine fragments, and Bhaal would be reborn. It would take over a century, but it would work. Mirkul, the Lord of the Dead, met his end in Waterdeep. A mortal woman named Midnight, who had found Maestra's pendant and absorbed some of the dead goddess's power, confronted Mirkul. She destroyed his avatar using a disintegrate spell, enhanced by the divine essence she carried. The New Gods. A group of mortals, ordinary adventurers thrust into extraordinary circumstances, recovered the tablets of fate and brought them to Ao. These heroes included Midnight, Cyric, Kelemvor, and Adon. Ao was pleased, and being pleased, he rewarded them. Midnight ascended to become the new Maestra, goddess of magic, inheriting the mantle and memories of her predecessor. Cyric, having killed Bhaal, ascended to claim the portfolios of murder, strife, and tyranny. He also inherited death from Mirkul, becoming one of the most powerful of the new gods, though he would later lose the death domain to Kelemvor after being driven temporarily mad. Torm, having died in service to his ethos of duty and loyalty, was resurrected by Ao and restored to divinity. And the mortal world changed. The time of troubles lasted only a few months, from the 1st of Kithorn to the 15th of Marpanoth in 1358 DR, but those months transformed Faerun forever. People had seen their gods bleed. They'd seen deities die. The distant, perfect beings they'd worshipped were revealed to be fallible, vulnerable, capable of making terrible mistakes. Faith would never be quite the same. And then Ao did something that would have consequences rippling through the centuries. He destroyed the tablets of fate, grinding them to powder. Without the tablets, the laws of realm space began to unravel. The barrier between Aber and Toril weakened. The worlds that Ao had separated after the Dawn War started slowly drifting back together. this would lead to disaster. But not yet. Not for another 27 years. In Part 4, the Bhaalspawn Saga, 10 years later, the year is 1368 DR, 10 years after the time of troubles. The world has recovered, mostly. Magic works normally again. The gods are back in their divine realms. Life goes on. In the library fortress of Candlekeep, an old mage named Gorion raises an orphan child. The child doesn't know their true heritage, doesn't know that their parent was a god, doesn't know that they carry a fragment of murder divinity in their soul. But someone else knows, and that someone is coming. Sarevok, another of Bhaal's children, has been plotting for years. He's manipulated the Iron Throne, a powerful merchant consortium, into causing an iron shortage throughout the region. Bad iron, brittle iron, weapons and armor that break in battle. Why? To provoke a war between Baldur's Gate and Amn. A war means death. Death means murder. Murder means power. And if Sarevok can accumulate enough power, enough essence from other Bhaalspawn he murders, he believes he can ascend to godhood and claim his father's throne. Gorion discovers the plot. He tries to sneak his ward out of Candlekeep under cover of darkness. Sarevok intercepts them. Gorion dies protecting the child. The Bhaalspawn Saga begins. The protagonist, called Abdel Adrian in official D&D lore, though you can name them anything in the game, survives and eventually uncovers Sarevok's plot. They stop the Iron Crisis, prevent the war, and confront Sarevok beneath Baldur's Gate. Sarevok dies. His fragment of Bhaal's essence transfers to his killer. But this is only the beginning. The Soul Thief months later, Abdel and their companions are ambushed by a mysterious mage named John Irenicus. This elven wizard has powers far beyond any mortal spellcaster. He captures Abdel and their foster sibling Imoen, both Bhaalspawn, and takes them to his secret laboratory. Irenicus has plans for the Bhaalspawn soul. He wants to steal it, to take that divine essence and make it his own. You see, Irenicus was once an elf of Suldanesella who tried to seize power from the Seldarine, the elven gods. His punishment was to have his soul removed, leaving him hollow and empty. Now he seeks to fill that void with stolen divinity. Abdel escapes from Irenicus's dungeon and ends up in Athkatla, the capital of Amn. The search for Irenicus takes them through the Underdark, to the Asylum of Spellhold, and finally to the elven city of Suldanesella itself. In the end, Irenicus is defeated. Abdel reclaims their soul. But the experience reveals something terrifying. The Bhaalspawn taint is getting stronger. Murder calls to them. The urge to kill grows harder to resist. And across Faerun, other Bhaalspawn are feeling the same pull. The Five, the prophecy hidden in ancient texts, speaks of the Bhaalspawn War. When the children of Baal begin to die in great numbers, the strongest will gather. 5 will rise above the others, and from their conflict, one will emerge to claim the throne of their father. That time has come. The 5 are powerful Bhaalspawn who have gathered armies: Ilasera, Yagashura, Sendai, Abazagal, and Balthazar. Each commands forces of monsters, cultists, or disciplined monks. They wage war across Tether, leaving devastation in their wake. But there's someone else pulling the strings. Amelisson, who appears to be a priestess of Bhaal trying to guide the Bhaalspawn, is actually harvesting their essence for herself. She's killed dozens of Bhaal's children in secret, accumulating power, planning to claim the throne of murder for herself. Abdel fights through the armies of the 5, confronting each in turn. They absorb more and more of Bhaal's essence with each victory. The taint grows stronger. The urge to transform into the Slayer, a monstrous avatar of murder, becomes harder to resist. Finally, at the throne of Bhaal, in a pocket plane outside normal reality, Amelison reveals her true nature. She's absorbed so much divine essence that she's nearly a demigod. The final battle is cataclysmic. Abdul wins. Amelison falls. And standing before the throne of Bhaal, with all that accumulated divine power waiting to be claimed, Abdel makes a choice. In the official D&D lore, Abdul refuses godhood. He rejects the throne, choosing to remain mortal. The divine essence is locked away in Mount Celestia. Bhaal remains dead. Abdul returns to Baldur's Gate, eventually becoming a commander in the Flaming Fist and later one of the Grand Dukes of the city. His extended lifespan, a gift of his Bhaalspawn heritage, allows him to serve for decades. The Bhaalspawn Saga ends. Bhaal is defeated. The threat is over. Except, it wasn't over. Not really, because Abdel wasn't the last Bhaalspawn. There was another, a teleporting coward named Viakung, who'd spent the entire war hiding, using his ability to vanish whenever danger approached. And in 1482 DR, over a century after the Bhaalspawn War, Viakung would make his move. Part 5. The Spell Plague. The Conspiracy. While Abdul Adrian lived his extended life as a Duke of Baldur's Gate, while the world recovered from the Bhaalspawn crisis, dark forces were moving. Shar, the goddess of darkness, had never forgotten her sister Selûne, had never forgiven the creation of light and life and warmth. For thousands of years, she'd plotted ways to undo creation, to return reality to the perfect void it had been before the gods. During the time of troubles, Shar had created the Shadow Weave, a dark mirror of Maestra's weave that drew power from the plane of shadow. It was meant to be an alternative to the weave, a path to power that Shar controlled. Some mortals, desperate for magic during times of crisis, learned to tap into it. But Shar wanted more than just an alternative. She wanted to destroy the weave entirely and make the Shadow Weave the only source of magic in existence. To do that, she needed Maestra dead. She found an ally in Cyric, the god of strife and lies, who'd never forgiven Maestra for the limits she placed on magic. Together, they hatched a plan. In 1385 DR, the year of blue fire, their conspiracy bore fruit. Cyric's priest Zacian freed a shadow mystic named Kashada from imprisonment. Together with other pawns of Shar, they manipulated events to bring Cyric face to face with Maestra. Cyric, mad with ambition and hate, killed Maestra. The goddess of magic died, and the weave, without Maestra to maintain it, collapsed. The blue fire magic exploded across Netheril. Blue flames, the color of wild magic, erupted everywhere at once. The fabric of reality tore, the plains shuddered, and Netheril itself began to physically transform. Remember the tablets of fate? Remember how Io destroyed them, weakening the barrier between Aber and Netheril? Well, with Maestra dead and the weave in chaos, that barrier collapsed completely. Entire regions of Netheril swapped places with regions of Aber. Chunks of one world replaced chunks of the other. Cities vanished overnight, replaced by alien landscapes. New races appeared, brought over from Aber, Dragonborn, Genasi, and others who'd never set foot on Netheril before. The capital of Halrua, that nation founded by Netherese refugees, was obliterated in seconds. The city of Mesro in Chult disappeared, pulled into a demiplane by its protectors. The Vilhon Reach became the sea of fallen stars, drowning thousands. Magic stopped working in some places and went haywire in others. Spellcasters suddenly found their magic failing or producing random effects. Some were driven mad by the magical feedback. Others gained strange new powers they couldn't control. Areas touched by the blue fire became plague lands, irradiated by raw magic, twisted into nightmarish landscapes where reality didn't work correctly. Cyric, for his role in causing this catastrophe, was arrested by Lathander, Tyr, and Selûne, then imprisoned in a divine cell for 1,000 years. Shar's plan had backfired. The Shadow Weave was destroyed along with the regular weave. The spell plague would last for a decade, from 1385 to 1395 DR, as the worst effects gradually subsided. But the changes it brought would last much longer. The world had been remade, whether it wanted to be or not. The Return of Shade. In 1372, Dautar, before the spell plague, something ominous happened. The floating city of Thultanthar, which had escaped to the plane of shadow during Karsus's Folly, returned to Netheril. But 1,700 years in the Shadowfell had changed its inhabitants. The Netherese arcanists were now shades, shadow-touched beings with dark powers. They called themselves the Shadowvar, and they had grand plans to restore Netheril to its former glory. Under the leadership of the High Prince Telemont Tanthal and his 12 sons, Shade Enclave began expanding its influence. They claimed the Anorok Desert, the very desert that had once been Netheril's heartland. They meddled in the politics of Cormia, Sembia, and other nations. The Shadowvar sought to control the weave itself. After the spell plague, when magic was in chaos, they saw an opportunity. If they could seize control of Myth Dranor's Mythal, the ancient elven spell structure that protected the city, they could control vast magical power. In 1487, DR Shade Enclave floated over Myth Drana and attacked. The battle was catastrophic. In the struggle for control of the Mythal and the Weave, something went wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. Shade Enclave, the last remnant of Netheril, fell from the sky and crashed directly onto Myth Dranor. Both cities were obliterated instantly. The destruction was so complete that nothing survived. The Netherese Empire, which had cast its shadow across 4,000 years of history, finally ended. Not through hubris this time, but through ambition meeting unexpected consequences. The floating city that had survived Karsus's Folly, that had endured 17 centuries in shadow, came down at last. Maestra returns. The spell plague officially ended around 1395 Dautar when arcane magic stabilized. But Maestra herself remained dead, her essence scattered and hidden. Until 1480, Dr. Elminster Almar, Mistra's chosen, the legendary archmage who'd served the goddess of magic for centuries, discovered something impossible. Maestra wasn't completely gone. Her essence had survived, hidden in the most unlikely place, the body of a bear. With the help of other chosen, Elminster restored Maestra's divinity. The goddess of magic returned, and with her return, the weave was resurrected. Magic became predictable again. The plague lands began to heal slowly, but the damage had been done. The worlds of Aber and Toril were still overlapping. Geography had been permanently altered. Entire cultures had been displaced or destroyed, and Ao, watching all this chaos, decided it was time to intervene again. Part 6. The Second Sundering, the World Torn Apart. In 1482, two things happened that would reshape reality. First, Abdul Adrian, former adventurer and current Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate, stood in the Wide, a marketplace in the upper city, giving a speech to his people. He was well over 100 years old, but still strong, still vital, maintained by the Bhaalspawn essence he'd never fully shed. Fiakang, the teleporting Bhaalspawn who'd hidden through the entire Bhaalspawn War, appeared from nowhere. Maybe he was tired of hiding. Maybe he wanted to finally end the prophecy. Maybe he'd just gone mad over the decades. He attacked Abdel. The two Bhaalspawn fought in the streets of Baldur's Gate. One was killed. We don't know which struck the final blow, but the survivor transformed into the Slayer, the monstrous avatar of murder, and rampaged through the city. Adventurers killed the Slayer. The last Bhaalspawn died, and with that death, Bhaal's master plan, set in motion over a century before, finally completed. Bhaal was reborn. The god of murder returned to the Faerunian pantheon. All those years, all those heroes fighting to stop him, all those sacrifices, and Bhaal got exactly what he wanted. The Bhaalspawn were just fuel for his resurrection. Their deaths, one way or another, always fed him. Second, Ao decided to recreate the Tablets of Fate. With the tablets restored, the laws of realm space stabilized, but restoring those laws meant separating Aber and Toril again, undoing the merger that the spell plague had caused. The second sundering began. Reality remakes itself. Starting in 1484 DR, catastrophes swept across Faerun. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, droughts. The land itself was changing as Aber and Toril pulled apart from each other. Regions that had come from Aber began fading back to their home world. Regions of Toril that had been swapped away reappeared. Geography that had been altered by the spell plague suddenly reverted to how it had been before. But the changes weren't just physical. The gods were changing too. Deities who had died or disappeared began returning. Bhaal reclaimed murder from Cyric. Merkul returned, though diminished. The goddess Eilistrai, the dark maiden who'd been thought dead, came back. The rules of divinity itself were in flux. Gods whose worship had waned found themselves weakening. New gods began to emerge from mortal heroes. The pantheon reorganized itself. Nations that had been fighting in wars suddenly found their enemies had vanished, or their borders had moved. The League of Silver Marchers dissolved in recrimination. Sembia fractured into independent city-states. The few remaining Netherese forces, leaderless after Shade's fall, fought each other and the Bedine over scraps. In 1487 DR, the changes peaked. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions continued for months. Ships arrived from Evermeet, Lantan, and Nimbril. Nations thought lost during the spell plague, announcing their return. Tales spread of Halruan skyships flying south again. The winter of 1487 to 1488, DR lasted longer than any winter on record. Seasons started and ended late, as if reality itself was recalibrating. Prayers to the gods went unanswered. The divine chosen, mortals who carried fragments of divine power, were everywhere, but the gods themselves seemed distant and quiet. From what we can infer based on how reality was restructuring itself, the gods were likely too busy stabilizing their own divine realms to pay attention to mortal prayers. By 1489 DR, the worst of it was over. The second sundering concluded. Aber and Toril were separate again. The geography had settled. The spell plague's changes had been mostly reversed, though not entirely. Some things remained different. Most importantly, magic worked the way it had before the spell plague. The rules of reality stabilized. The world could breathe again. But all that chaos, all that upheaval, had created opportunities for anyone with ambition and the will to seize power during the confusion. And in the city of Elturel, something very bad was about to happen. Part 7. The Road to Baldur's Gate. The Companions in 1444. Elturel was under siege. Vampires led by a powerful undead lord threatened to overrun the city. A priest of Torm named Thavius Krieg stood in the city's temple and prayed desperately for salvation. He didn't care where it came from or what price he'd have to pay. He just needed help. Someone answered. Not Torm. Someone else. A deal was struck. A second sun, called the Companion, appeared over Elturel. Its holy light burned vampires and protected the city. The vampires were driven off. Elturel was saved. Krieg became a hero, eventually rising to become High Overseer of Elturel. The Companion remained, a permanent second sun hovering above the city, its radiance keeping evil at bay. What Krieg didn't tell anyone was the price he'd paid. The Companion wasn't a gift. It was a contract. And in 50 years, that contract would come due. The Descent in 1494, 50 years after the Companion's appearance, hell came to Elturel. The Companion transformed. The Holy Sun became a pillar of infernal chains that wrapped around the entire city. And then, as thousands of residents screamed, Elturel was dragged off the material plane. It reappeared in Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells, chained above the river Styx, the entire city. Every building, every person, every brick and stone plunged into hell itself. This was Zariel's plan. Zariel, the archdevil who ruled Avernus, had once been an angel who fell during a doomed crusade against demons. Now she commanded the forces of Avernus in the eternal blood war between devils and demons. Thavius Krieg's contract had sold Elturel to Zariel. The city would provide souls for the blood war, fresh recruits for Hell's armies, whether they wanted to serve or not. Grand Duke Ulder Ravengard of Baldur's Gate, leader of the Flaming Fist Mercenary Company, had been visiting Elturel on diplomatic business. He disappeared along with the city, trapped in hell. The people of Baldur's Gate panicked. Their leader was gone. Elturel, their neighbor and sometimes ally, had vanished. Refugees from Elturel, who'd been traveling outside the city when it fell, began arriving with insane stories about cities in hell. No one knew what to do, but adventurers, heroes, brave or foolish souls went into Avernus to find out what happened. They discovered the conspiracy. They learned about the contract, and they fought their way through devils and demons to reach Elturel. The campaign of Descent into Avernus, the official D&D adventure, gives players multiple ways to resolve the crisis. They can make deals, break contracts, fight Zariel directly, or even redeem the fallen angel. For our purposes, what matters is that Elturel was returned to the material plane. The city came back, battered and traumatized, but intact. Grand Duke Ravengard survived, but the event left scars. The refugees from Elturel, many of them tieflings, became scapegoats for the disaster. People blamed them for what happened, even though they were victims. The tieflings of Elturel found themselves persecuted, driven from their homes, forced to seek shelter elsewhere. Many of them ended up traveling north toward Baldur's Gate, hoping for sanctuary. They'd find something else instead. The Cult of the Absolute. While all this chaos was unfolding, while cities were falling into hell and being pulled back out, something else was growing in the shadows. 3 beings, calling themselves the Dead Three in mockery or homage to the old gods of death, began gathering followers. They promised power. They promised purpose. They promised absolute certainty in a world that had been torn apart and put back together wrong. Except they weren't just cultists. They were chosen by actual gods. Paal, newly resurrected, chose a young woman in Baldur's Gate. She'd been abandoned as a child, raised by a shapeshifter. She'd learned murder from a young age, becoming an assassin of terrifying skill. Bhaal made her his chosen. Her name? Well, we'll learn her name in Baldur's Gate 3. For now, she operates in shadow, building Bhaal's cult, preparing his return to full power. Bane, who'd been resurrected in 1372 by destroying his half-demon son Iaktu Shvim, chose Enver Gortash, a brilliant man, charismatic and ambitious, who'd sold weapons to Zariel herself. Gortash understood power, understood how to manipulate people, how to make them serve without realizing they were being controlled. Mirkul, returned from death though diminished, chose Ketheric Thorm, a paladin who'd lost faith after the death of his daughter, who'd turned to Shar in his grief, then to Mirkul when Shar failed him. Mirkul granted him invulnerability, made him immortal as long as certain conditions were met. These three chosen worked together, plotting to seize control of Baldur's Gate and perhaps all of Faerun. They created a false god, an entity they called the Absolute, claiming it was a new deity that offered absolute certainty and purpose to its followers. But the Absolute was a lie, a mask for their own ambitions. Their plan involved mind flayers, ancient Illithids hidden for millennia who had their own agenda. The mind flayers had found something in the Underdark, something they called the Progenitor, an elder brain of immense size and power. The Chosen of the Dead Three made a deal with the mind flayers. Together they'd create an army. Together they'd infect people with tadpoles that would eventually transform them into mind flayers or make them susceptible to control. The Crown of Karsus, an artifact from the fallen Netheril Empire that could control the weave itself, became part of their plan. With the crown placed upon the elder brain, with tadpoles spread throughout the population, they could create an empire of absolute control. The Absolute cult began quietly gathering power. The tiefling refugees fleeing from persecution after Elturel's fall were perfect targets. Vulnerable, desperate, easy to manipulate with promises of safety and purpose. In Baldur's Gate itself, people began disappearing. The patriarchs, the noble families, found themselves infected with tadpoles. Duke Stelmane, one of the four leaders of Baldur's Gate, had been puppeted by a mind flayer for years. The city was being infiltrated from within. And then, in 1492, Diyar, the year of 3 ships sailing, everything came to a head. The Nautiloid. A mind flayer ship, a nautiloid powered by psychic energy and the power of the elder brain, was on a mission. Capture subjects. Infect them with modified tadpoles. Return them to the elder brain. But something went wrong. The nautiloid was intercepted by Githyanki, the warriors who'd freed themselves from mind flayer slavery centuries ago and who now hunted Illithids wherever they found them. In the chaos of battle, as the nautiloid crashed through planes and dimensions, several of the infected captives broke free from their pods. They fought through the ship, desperately trying to survive, knowing they had parasites in their heads that would eventually transform them into mind flayers. The nautiloid crashed in the wilderness of Faerun, not far from Baldur's Gate. The survivors stumbled out, infected but somehow not transforming, linked psychically through their tadpoles but retaining their own minds. They were strangers to each other. A Githyanki warrior seeking a stolen artifact. A half-elf cleric with mysterious gaps in her memory. A human warlock bound to a devil. A vampire spawn hoping to be free from his master. An exiled wizard who'd made a terrible mistake trying to impress a goddess. And others, each with their own story, each with a tadpole in their head and a desperate need to find a cure before they transformed. This is where Baldur's Gate 3 begins. But the infected protagonists don't know the full story yet. Don't know about the Dead Three. Don't know about the elder brain wearing the crown of Karsus. Don't know that the god of murder has returned and is watching. They're about to learn. Part 8. Revelations and Patterns. The truth about history. If you've made it this far, you might have noticed something. A pattern. The same mistakes repeated over and over, echoing through the centuries. Karsus tried to steal a god's power and destroyed his civilization. The chosen of the Dead Three are trying to steal control of an elder brain using an artifact of that same fallen civilization. The Primordials tried to reclaim Toril and forced Ao to split the world. The spell plague merged those worlds back together, and Io had to separate them again. Shar has spent 10,000 years trying to return reality to the void, and she keeps failing because Selûne keeps opposing her. Bhaal seeded the world with his children, knowing they'd eventually murder each other and resurrect him. And it worked. It took over a century, but it worked. The Forgotten Realms doesn't forget randomly. It forgets deliberately. Dangerous knowledge is buried, destroyed, locked away in places like Candlekeep where scholars can study it, but common people will never see it. Why? Because knowledge is power, and power, in the wrong hands, can break the world. Every major catastrophe in Forgotten Realms history happened because someone found knowledge they shouldn't have and used it in ways they shouldn't have. The Batraki found rituals to summon primordials. The Tearfall resulted. Karsus found the spell to steal godhood. Netheril fell. Bane and Myrkul stole the tablets of fate. The Pastor time of troubles happened. Cyric and Shar conspired to kill Maestra. The spell plague occurred. And now, in Baldur's Gate 3, the chosen of the Dead Three have found the crown of Karsus and learned how to use elder brains. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhyme scheme in the Forgotten Realms is getting predictable. But here's the real revelation, the one that makes all of this personal. You're part of the pattern too. Think about it. You're an adventurer who's been given extraordinary power you didn't ask for. A tadpole that grants you abilities beyond normal mortals. Knowledge of how to control an elder brain. Access to artifacts and magic that should have stayed buried. You're standing exactly where Karsus stood. Where the Bhaalspawn stood. Where every hero-turned catastrophe stood right before they made their fatal choice. The game will give you opportunities to seize ultimate power. To control the elder brain, to become something more than mortal. And when those opportunities come, you'll have to choose. Will you be different? Or will you be another name in the history books, another cautionary tale about ambition and hubris? The pattern suggests you won't be different. The pattern suggests that when given ultimate power, mortals take it, consequences be damned. But the pattern can break. It has broken before, rarely, when someone chose wisdom over power, when someone said no to godhood and walked away. The question is, will you? The survivors. But here's something else worth noticing. Survivors. Theltantha survived Karsus's folly by fleeing to Shadow. It took 1,700 years, but it came back. Ithrin, another Netherese city, survived by crashing into a glacier where it froze perfectly preserved. 3 Netherese enclaves landed safely, and their people survived, founding new civilizations. Elturel was dragged to hell, but brought back. Mesro disappeared during the spell plague, but survived in a demiplane, waiting to return. The world breaks over and over. Cities fall. Civilizations collapse. Gods die. And yet something always survives. Someone always makes it through. The Forgotten Realms is a world defined by catastrophic failure, followed by stubborn survival. It's a world where the apocalypse happens regularly, and people just keep going. They rebuild. They adapt. They figure it out, because that's what mortals do. The gods may be powerful, but mortals are resilient. And in Baldur's Gate 3, you'll be tested. You'll face gods and demons and ancient evils. You'll make choices that affect thousands of lives. You'll potentially become more powerful than most heroes in history. But the real question isn't whether you can defeat the Absolute. The real question is, what will you do with that power afterward? Will you repeat the mistakes of Karsus, of Bane and Miracle, of everyone who reached for power and broke the world in the process? Or will you be one of the survivors who helps rebuild? Conclusion. The weight of history. The adventure you're about to have in Baldur's Gate 3 didn't start when that Nautiloid crashed. It started 10,000 years ago when Io created realm space. It started when Selûne and Shar first warred over creation. It started when Karsus fell and Netheril crashed. It started when Bhaal died and seeded the world with his murderous children. Every dungeon you explore has history. Every artifact you find connects to ancient empires. Every god you encounter has been playing long games across centuries. The Dead Three aren't new villains. They're old gods using old tactics, wearing new faces. The Mind Flayers aren't random monsters. They're ancient enemies who've been infiltrating civilizations since before humans built cities. The Crown of Karsus isn't just a powerful item. It's the last echo of the greatest magical empire the world ever saw, the one that fell because one man couldn't accept his limitations. And you, the protagonist with a tadpole in your head, desperate to find a cure, possibly romance a vampire or seduce a bear. You're walking in the footsteps of heroes and villains who shaped the world. The Bhaalspawn walked this path. The chosen undead who became Lord Gwyn's kindling. The adventurers who returned the tablets of fate and became gods. History is watching. The gods are watching. And whether you know it or not, your choices will echo. Maybe you'll save Baldur's Gate and become a hero. Maybe you'll claim ultimate power and become a tyrant. Maybe you'll make mistakes that future scholars will study for centuries, trying to understand where it all went wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll break the cycle. You'll find a new path. You'll solve the problem without catastrophic collateral damage. It's happened before. Just not very often. The Forgotten Realms earned its name honestly. This world forgets its mistakes, buries its failures, and stumbles forward into the next crisis. But you don't have to forget. Now you know the history. You understand the patterns. You see how easily power corrupts and how often good intentions pave the road to apocalypse. So when you're standing in front of the Elder Brain, when you have ultimate power within reach, when you're deciding the fate of thousands, remember Karsus, remember Bane and Miracle, remember Bhaal, who turned his children into weapons and fuel for his resurrection. Remember that every catastrophe in Forgotten Realms history started with someone thinking they could handle power that should never have been touched. And then make your choice. Epilogue. Everything connects. Before we end, there's one more thing worth understanding about the Forgotten Realms. Nothing exists in isolation. That vampire spawn in your party? His master is over 200 years old, part of an unbroken lineage of master vampires that goes back centuries before Baldur's Gate even existed. That wizard who made a mistake trying to impress Mistra. He's walking the same path as Karsus, reaching for magical power beyond mortal limits. That cleric with memory problems? There's a reason her memories are gone. And that reason connects to gods and schemes that have been running for decades. Those tiefling refugees you meet? They're survivors of Elturel's descent, victims of a deal made 50 years before they were born. The Githyanki hunting Mind Flayers. They're continuing a war that's lasted for centuries, fighting to prevent the enslavement of their entire race. Everything in Baldur's Gate 3 is the result of decisions made long ago. Everything you do will ripple forward into the future. This isn't just a game where you kill monsters and take their loot, though you'll definitely do that. This is a world with 10,000 years of history behind every encounter, every choice, every consequence. And now you know that history. You know why magic has rules, and why breaking those rules destroys civilizations. You know why the gods walk carefully, and why mortals who reach for divinity usually die badly. You know why the Elder Brain is dangerous beyond measure, and why the crown of Karsus should never have been found. You know what's at stake. So when you load up Baldur's Gate 3 and create your character, when you wake up on that beach with a tadpole in your head and a desperate need to find a cure, you'll understand something most players don't. You're not just fighting to save yourself. You're fighting to prevent the next Karsus's folly, the next spell plague, the next catastrophe that will reshape the world and kill thousands. No pressure. Welcome to the Forgotten Realms. Try not to break it. And if you enjoyed this journey through 10,000 years of history, if you're excited to explore this world even more deeply, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking that like button. Because there's so much more to discover in the Forgotten Realms, so many more stories hidden in ruins and tombs and forgotten libraries. The adventure is just beginning.